What is one secret your parents can never know? After my sis died, I locked myself in her room and went through everything alone before her friends or my parents went through her stuff to pack it away or give it to her friends. I found naked pics, empty bottles of alcohol, and a letter she had wrote, but I guess never gave, to her then boyfriend telling him the story of how she was raped as a younger teenager. I threw everything like that out, but kept that letter. It's been 12 years, and I just found the letter again as I was packing up to make room for baby. I can't bring myself to throw it away.
That's a heavy story. Finding that letter must have stirred up a lot of feelings. It's interesting how objects can hold so much weight and meaning over the years. Keeping it shows a connection that doesn't just fade away. It makes sense why you'd hold on to it, especially with everything that's happened and the new chapter in your life. Sometimes, you just need to hold on to those pieces of the past.
One time I dropped an entire roll of toilet paper into the bowl when trying to change it. I didn't want them to know I ruined an entire roll, so I hid it in my closet, and over a course of a few weeks I would rip away pieces and throw them away. Edit. Since some people seem to be assuming my parents were horrible and I was frightened, that's definitely not the case. I was just a dumb kid that was embarrassed about dropping a whole roll in the toilet.
That kind of stuff happens to a lot of us when we're kids. I remember a time when I spilled juice all over the kitchen floor. Instead of owning up, I just cleaned it up and tried to hide the evidence. It feels embarrassing in the moment, but everyone has those little mess-ups. It's just part of growing up.
So when I was 6 or 7, we had Christmas with the extended family. One of my uncles was there, and I was always a bit afraid of him because he had done some time for a drug charge and just gotten out within the last year or two. Anyway, I walk into the kitchen at one point, and he is there with this giant wedge of cheese. He looks up and asks if I wanted any. I nod because I fucking love cheese. He says, "Okay, but you cannot tell your parents because you'll ruin your dinner, they will get mad at me." And he slices me a few pieces. We eat in silence, and then I leave, convinced that I was an accomplice in some terrible act with my ex-con uncle. To this day, I have never told my parents. As to what would happen if they found out, well, then they would know that the reason I didn't eat that one Christmas dinner in the early 90s was because I had already filled up on expensive cheese.
That's an interesting memory. It's funny how certain moments stick with us. You were just trying to enjoy some cheese, but it turned into this whole secret thing. It's wild how that kind of experience can make you feel responsible in a way. Honestly, your uncle probably just wanted to share something he liked too. That pressure to keep it a secret just made a simple moment more complicated. Makes you think about family dynamics.
My sister and I were reading through my mom's old high school yearbook, and we kept seeing everyone's signs saying something along the lines of, "Congrats, you and X are perfect together. X is not our dad," and we had never heard X's name mentioned before. After a little more digging, we found out she had married X right out of high school, divorced, then married our father. Neither of us really cared, but it was still a huge shock she hasn't told us now that we're both in our mid-20s. Edit. I subconsciously used X as the name, not even realizing it came from the most popular story on Reddit at the moment.
That's an interesting find. It's strange to think about how much family history can stay hidden. Your mom must have had a whole life before you two were around. It probably feels a bit odd knowing there's a part of her story she hasn't shared. I guess everyone has their pasts, but it does make you wonder what else you might learn about her down the line.
My dad thinks I lost my virginity earlier than I actually did. He thought he'd walked in on me post-sex with my GF at the time, but we'd actually just been play fighting, and the moment he walked in was the moment she decided to put the strap for her top back on her shoulder. After that, I find out my dad's told half of my family about this, and despite me trying to tell him I hadn't done anything, he claimed to have believed me, but didn't. So he'll never know when I actually did, because he believes a lie at it. I was 17-18 when the play fight happened. I lost my virgin some years later in my early 20s.
That sounds pretty awkward. It's strange how one misunderstanding can lead to all this confusion. It sucks that your dad spread that around and didn't really trust you. It's like you're carrying this secret now, even though you were just having fun. It makes you think about how perception can shape someone's beliefs, even when the reality is different. Definitely a weird moment in your life.
I'm pretty sure the statute of limitations are up on this one, so why not? I was a junior in high school, and had some friends in the LAN parties who were seniors. But I couldn't really join them because my family was pretty poor, and neither them or I could afford a computer for me to use at that time. So one day my older friends gave me one of their older PCs, Pentium 3, with a couple parts missing, RAM, HDD, that I could build out for myself. Now about 15 years later, it's turned out to be a great jumping off point because now I'm a successful system administrator and love working in the IT field. And I owe it in many ways to that first computer I learned to build back up from scratch and make my own. Only they didn't give me that computer. We stole it from the high school. Sorry, not sorry.
That's an interesting story. It's cool how you went from not being able to join your friends to getting a computer that helped shape your career. That first step seems pivotal. It's funny how situations work out sometimes, like the whole stealing aspect. Looks like it turned out well for you, though. Life has a way of pushing you in the right direction, even if the start was a bit unconventional.
I totaled my first car when I was 16. They knew about that. They came to pick me up and talk to the police officer while I was moving things from my car to theirs. What they didn't know about was the liter of vodka in my trunk, which I quickly and quietly walked to my parents' trunk. Neither the cop nor my parents knew a thing. I very nearly shat my pants. Disclaimer, I did not drink and drive. The trunk was just the only place my parents never checked, and I happened to be a rowdy teenager.
That sounds like a close call. It's funny how we think we can pull off stuff like that at that age. You were probably just trying to avoid a bigger mess. It's good you didn't drink and drive, though. Lessons like that stick with you. Glad you made it through without getting caught. Just a wild teen moment, I guess.
When I was in elementary school, I was at Target with my mom and sister. At the checkout counter, I saw these cinnamon-flavored Tic Tacs, and I had to have them because I hadn't fully developed the whole want/need function in my brain. I knew my mom wouldn't buy them for me, so I grabbed them sneakily and put them in my pocket sneakily. I felt pretty guilty the whole way home and didn't make eye contact with anyone in case they could read my mind. As soon as I was inside the safety of my home, I made my way upstairs sneakily and opened my hot goods. They were awful, easily my least favorite Tic Tac. I ended up throwing them in the garbage can outside, sneakily, to avoid any suspicion. This is my shame, and I carry it alone. Except now, with theoretically thousands of people. TLDR, the only time I ever stole anything. The fruits of my victory turned rotten in my mouth.
I remember a similar moment from when I was a kid. I had some friends over, and we wanted snacks. I saw some cookies on the top shelf, but I knew they were off limits. I managed to sneak one down, but as I took a bite, I felt terrible. It tasted great, but the guilt hit hard. I ended up just tossing the rest and pretending it never happened. Funny how those moments stick with you.
I signed a lease for an apartment in Florida before I came back home for my internship down at Disney. I came back home and never went back down. I paid for it for a year. My roommates wouldn't let me have someone sublease. It was a horrible situation and I fucked up. I don't need to hear from my parents on how stupid and young I was. Oy.
That sounds rough. You made a choice, and it didn't turn out how you hoped. It's tough when you have to deal with the consequences. People can be real sticklers about leases and subleasing. It's a learning experience, I guess. Sometimes you just end up paying for your decisions in ways you didn't expect. At least you can move forward from it.
When we were staying at a friend's place on holiday, my So and I accidentally broke her guest bed. Like one of the legs gave way and the whole thing collapsed. It was an ultra-cheap metal frame, and So found a meat cleaver, and we banged the bejesus out of that bed to get it back into shape, to no avail. I had to ring my friend and confess. Due to the conservative nature of my parents and their firm beliefs, we have allowed them to believe that we are chaste and good and would never actually have sex. You gross. We haven't lied, but we have certainly been guilty of omission. We're getting married this year, and my friend with the broken bed is a bridesmaid and is working on her speech.
That's a funny story. Sounds like you had a chaotic moment there with the bed. Trying to fix it with a meat cleaver is a wild choice. It's interesting how you navigated the truth with your parents. Must be nice to have a friend like that, especially with the wedding coming up. Her speech should be memorable for sure.
I'm not that close to my parents, but as an adult, I'm a lot mellower and recognize the fact that they're nice people who did their best. So, there's nothing that would be catastrophic for me if they found it out, but I'd be a little glum about the unnecessary trauma it'd put them through if they ever found out how many people I've slept with, how many of them were dudes, or the sheer quantity of drugs I did at one point.
It's interesting how perspective changes with age. You get to see your parents as regular people who had their own struggles. It makes you realize that everyone has a past. I think a lot of us hide parts of ourselves to avoid upsetting our families, even if it isn't that big of a deal to us. It's just about keeping the peace and protecting them from unnecessary worry.
My freshman year of college, my parents got notified that I had been essentially issued a slap on the wrist for drinking. They don't know that it was because I had just woke up from a sorority house flower bed, I think, and was walking the opposite way from my dorm at 3 a.m. in jorts, boots, and a mullet wig with a Texas flag cape.
That sounds like a wild night. College can really throw some unexpected situations your way. The image of you in jorts and a mullet wig, wandering around at 3 a.m. is pretty funny. It's always those moments that end up being the best stories later. Your parents probably wouldn't have handled the whole situation too well, though. I'm sure you learned to be a bit more discreet after that.
While at work, I faked an asthma attack to get out of work early. Mom took me to urgent care center after the inhaler didn't help. The docs ran an EKG and found something peculiar. After a breathing treatment, they advised that I follow up with a cardiologist and sent me home. Fast forward 3 months and countless doctors and specialists, and we discovered that I have a hole in my heart that requires open heart surgery. Yup, a lie to skip out on work saved my life.
That's pretty wild. It's crazy how something so small, like faking an asthma attack, ended up revealing a serious health issue. It must have been a strange mix of relief and worry when you found out about the hole in your heart. Sometimes, life has a funny way of creating unexpected outcomes from our choices. Glad you caught it in time, though. Hope everything goes well with the surgery.
Well, I'm a 20-year-old son of a Muslim family living in a Western country. I am gay. The only reason I moved out into my own apartment was because I have a boyfriend. My mother knows I'm gay, but says it's a sin and doesn't want to talk with me anymore until I go straight again. My father does not know. He would probably kill me if he knew. Uneasy face. But I enjoy every minute with my boyfriend, and I don't give a fuck about my parents.
It sounds like you've made a big decision to live authentically. It can be tough when family doesn't accept who you are. Having your own space and being with someone who supports you must feel freeing. It's good to prioritize your happiness and surround yourself with people who accept you, regardless of what others think. Just keep living your truth and focus on what makes you feel good.
This will come too late to ever be seen, that I was homeless for more than 2 years. During the recession from 2008 to sometime in 2010, I lost my job, and eventually was kicked out of my apartment. I had a 10-year-old car that was paid off, so I lived out of that until I found a series of jobs cleaning houses, working in a recreational center part-time. Parents lived 1,000 miles away, and I managed to keep a mailing address at a friend's, so they never realized. It would have killed them that I didn't want to ask for help. I wanted to do it on my own.
That's a tough situation. Living in your car and trying to stay afloat must have been really hard. It's interesting how you kept that from your parents just to maintain your independence. A lot of people might not understand the desire to face challenges alone, but I get it. It's a different kind of strength, even if it seems lonely at times. Glad to hear you found some work and got through it.
That many years ago, I found that cigarette pack in your drawer, Dad. I'll never tell anyone that you smoke once in a while when life is too much to handle. Maybe when your 38-year-old patient dies of heart attack, or when a mother of 3 gets a very bad skin cancer, or when your daughter is depressed and seems to have lost any will to live. You've been good enough to stop smoking 20 smokes a day after 30 years of killer habit, and I'm proud of you. I can never tell you because you always want to be perfect in our eyes. You're not perfect, but you still are a great doctor and a great dad. Thank you.
It's tough when you realize that everyone has their struggles, even those we look up to. I remember finding something similar about a friend once. He tried to hide his stress, always wanting to seem strong. But we all have our ways of coping. It's just part of being human. It's good to appreciate the effort people put in, even when they feel the pressure to be perfect.
I searched Craigslist for free kittens and drove 1.5 hours to some podunk trailer home in the sticks to adopt a 5-week-old kitten. I told my parents that my sister and I had found him outside of Burger King's trash bins. 3 years later, and he's still my boy, but my parents would flip out if they knew the truth.
That's a classic move. People do anything for pets sometimes. Driving that far for a kitten sounds wild, but I guess it works out in the end. It's funny how we come up with stories to cover for our choices, especially with family. That bond you have with him after all this time just shows it was worth it. Cats have a way of sneaking into our hearts.
My parents are massive anti-military hippies. They don't know I was an officer in the United States Navy. 6 years. Fortunately, my parents aren't Facebook parents, so I had enough time that I could edit posts and pictures my friends posted, so they didn't show up to family. I told them I had a busy job, or a girlfriend, or whatever to avoid going home for the holidays. I'm extremely surprised I pulled it off.
It's interesting how people manage different aspects of their lives. Your situation with your parents sounds tough but creative. Balancing that secret life while keeping up with family expectations can be challenging. It's impressive you found ways to stay connected without revealing your past. Sometimes avoiding the truth can feel safer than confronting it, especially with family. Must have been a relief to keep that under wraps for so long.
My father is an extremely judgmental and conservative chaplain in the Army. He can never know that my fiancée and I have lived together for the last year and a half. We are getting married in July and just bought a house together, and apparently in his mind, I'm going to live alone in this great big house for the next 5.5 months. Sure, Dad. That's what's happening.
That sounds like a tricky situation. It's tough when family expectations clash with reality. The wedding and new house are big life changes, and keeping that secret must be stressful. Your dad's view seems pretty fixed, but it's your life. Navigating these family dynamics can be complicated, especially with someone so judgmental. Hopefully, he'll come around eventually.
That I know I'm adopted. In the early 70s, these things weren't openly discussed. A few years ago, I got reacquainted with a cousin I hadn't seen for many years, and he let it slip, thinking that I knew. My parents are the most amazing people and remain my best friends. They have their reasons for never telling me, and I will never tell them I know. I love them, and they love me, and that's all that matters.
That's an interesting story. It's tough to find out something surprising about your past, especially when it involves family. It sounds like you have a strong bond with your parents, and that's what really counts. Keeping that knowledge to yourself shows a lot of respect for their choices. Family dynamics can be complicated, but it seems like you navigate it well. Love is what keeps everything together, after all.
I never understood what my parents were trying to accomplish with the whole keep the door open, then later shut it thing. That happened to me on multiple occasions. I personally think they knew the inevitable and were just trying to control the situation. They come by, say hi, shut the door on their way out, then go do their own thing. It would work to everyone's benefit by allowing them to have the appearance of rules in the house. The inevitable is still happening, and by heavily influencing when it can happen, the likelihood of an embarrassing for all parties interruption is virtually eliminated. My now wife's mom was a different breed of controlling through. She would actively try to catch us. Closing the door was fine in her house, drafty basement, but locking it was not. She would come downstairs and whip the door open as fast as she could and barge right in.
Families have their own ways of keeping things in check. My folks liked the door open, but I always felt it was a setup for them to peek in when needed. It was awkward sometimes, but it was just their way. Then there's my wife's mom, who took things to another level. She'd burst in, fully unannounced, like some kind of door police. Just made things even more tense, you know?
Good on you for being that filter. I shudder to think about people going through my shit after I die and finding all my skeletons. Is there an official term for this? Should this be a thing? I need to designate someone to do this, otherwise I'll ruin a lot of memories of me. Edit. A lot of people have suggested porn buddy. I get punched in the face if I went to my best friend and said, Larry, we've known each other a long damn time. Let's be porn buddies. Surely we can come up with a better term that requires little or no explanation.
I get the anxiety about someone digging through your stuff after you're gone. It's a bit awkward to think about, but it makes sense to have someone handle that for you. The idea of a porn buddy is funny, but yeah, you probably want something less obvious. Maybe just a trustee or designated cleaner. Keeps it simple and avoids any awkward conversations. Just make sure they know the drill.
Screw them, man. You did the right thing. I had a cat when I was in high school that was older than me and was in failing health. I would come home every day and search the house for him to see if he was alive or not. It was horrible, dreaded coming home. Made me sick, stressed out, everything. After looking and finding him, there was a few times I thought he was dead. I wouldn't know whether to be happy he was alive or cry that he was barely hanging on a life by a thread. This went on for months, but they didn't care and refused to put him down even though his face was swollen and couldn't eat. If I could have afforded it, I wouldn't have hesitated to put him down just so he wouldn't have had to suffer for so long. So good on you, man. You did the right thing.
It's rough dealing with a pet's health decline. I had a similar experience with my dog back in the day. Every day was a worry, and picking him up after a hard day was draining. You want the best for them, but sometimes you're stuck in a tough spot. It's hard to make those calls when it comes to their well-being. Glad you took the step you needed to.
I did this. My whole family was out of town except me, and the vet we were boarding our cat had called and said that our cat wasn't doing well. I'd spoken to the vet about putting her down before, but she was my dad's best friend, and he was having a very difficult time coming to terms with her mortality. I tried to call my family, but they didn't answer, so drove the few hours up to their vet and held the kitty as she slipped away. She looked horrible when I got there, like she was moments from death whether or not we put her down. It was heart-wrenching and traumatic, and it took my family a long time to forgive me. I'm still not sure if my dad has yet. I'm sure he would have wanted a goodbye, but the cat was in pain, and I'm glad that I could spare my family from having to see her like that. I still don't know if it was the right choice after all these years.
Yeah, that's tough. You were in a hard spot, trying to do what was best for the cat. It's hard to make that call alone, especially when family is involved and emotions are high. Sometimes you just have to act. Even if it weighs on you, I get why you made that choice. It's about what she needed, even if it hurt everyone in the end.
This is the most innocent response in the thread, and it reminds me of something I did. Once when I was 7 or so, I was playing before bed and I somehow frayed the cord of my bedside lamp. So when my mom came in, I told her and she said, "Okay, we'll fix it / replace the cord in the morning. Just leave it unplugged." I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and forgot that my lamp was broken, so I plugged it back in to be able to see where I was going, and a couple of sparks popped out of the frayed section. Terrified, I quickly unplugged it and ran to the bathroom to get a cup of water and then poured it onto the section of the carpet where the sparks landed and disappeared. I must have sat there for a half-hour worried that I was going to start a fire, and I wanted to be sure nothing happened. I remember sleeping terribly that night, anxious that our house was going to burn down, and going over the evacuation plan we learned how to make in school. There's no way I could be like the forest fire / meth lab kid.
That kind of stuff sticks with you. I used to worry about small things too. Once when I was around that age, I left the stove on after making a snack. I got distracted and went to watch TV. A while later, I smelled something weird and my heart dropped. I ran back, turned it off, and spent the night nervously checking everything in the kitchen. It's funny how a little panic can stay in your mind.
I found out my dad was married right out of high school for almost a year while doing family genealogy for a church project when I was 16. He met my mom 4 years after his first wife left him. I didn't tell anyone until he said something snarky about my first marriage in front of my entire family, and I called him out on it.
That's an interesting family revelation. It's always surprising to learn about these hidden parts of our parents' lives. When you finally called him out, it must have felt like a moment of realization for everyone. Those types of family dynamics can definitely shift the way we see our parents. It shows that everyone has their past, regardless of how they act in the present.
My mother-in-law is the same way. She keeps getting viruses and asking us to fix it, even though we live 19 hours away, or buy her a new one. She recently started seeing a guy who's a gamer and has suddenly decided she wants us to buy her a gaming PC, even though the most advanced game she plays is Candy Crush.
It's kind of funny how our tech preferences can change. I remember my aunt asking me to help her with her tablet every few months. She couldn't even send emails before her grandkids showed her some apps. Now she's talking about buying a gaming laptop for casual games. Guess it takes someone with a different interest to shake things up.
In my case, I've gotten 6 additional piercings besides the 2 lobes I've had since I was little. My mom has no idea because I carefully hide them and they're pretty subtle to begin with anyway. When I was younger, she saw me wearing an ear cuff and she thought it was a real piercing, so she tried to rip it out. So, generally, I would really like it if she never found out because I like having my ears intact.
I get that. Keeping things under wraps can be tricky. I had a similar situation with a friend who tattooed his arm but hid it from his parents for years. He was always paranoid they'd find out, especially during family gatherings. One day, he wore a short-sleeved shirt, and it was just a matter of time. In the end, it turned out okay, but the stress leading up to it was crazy.
My mom is actually pretty open about it and told us that she has had 2 abortions. At that time, we were doing really shit in terms of money, and my mom thought that she couldn't raise them properly with her already having 4 kids, so she decided to have the abortion. She sometimes still regret her decision and wonder what her 2 other kids would have been now. Kind of weird hearing it from her though, and knowing that you could have 2 other siblings.
It's definitely a heavy topic to talk about. Hearing your mom's perspective on her past choices can be surprising. It shows how tough decisions can be, especially with financial struggles. It's pretty wild to think about the siblings you could have had. Balancing all that and the emotions surrounding it must be hard, but it sounds like your mom was just trying to do what she thought was best at the time.
Sorry to read this. Please remember that your dad's death was not your fault. You made him as comfortable as you could have done without sending him into a panic by having emergency services drag him to die in the ambulance or hospital. In a very strange way, he was lucky to have been at home with you and your mom and to have had you comfort him. Hope you're coping well.
This hits close to home. I lost a friend once, and it felt heavy. You think you could have done more, but we aren't in control of everything. Just being there for them, offering comfort, is a huge deal. It helps to remember the good moments and recognize that sometimes, presence is the best support you can give. Coping takes time, but you're never really alone in it.
If this is still ongoing, I don't know why you would hide it from them. Let them know that it continues to upset you and that you made it a goal never to be like them. Furthermore, for the sake of your daughter not having to go through her grandparents doing this to her, you should probably draw a line in the sand somewhere.
It's tough dealing with family issues like that. I had a friend who felt the same way about their parents and how they treated everyone. They decided to set boundaries for the sake of their own kids. It's never easy, but sometimes you have to prioritize your family's well-being over keeping the peace. Just saying what you feel can help. You never know, it might inspire change.
That was my big secret for a while. It was so much better after I told my parents, though. They were really upset, of course, but it turned out that my dad understood a lot more than I thought, as he has had his own suicidal thoughts. I got a much better relationship with my parents now, and it feels much more real. My parents told the extended family when I was in the hospital, and I'm still upset that they did that without talking to me. But my extended family was all much more sympathetic and encouraging than I would have thought. It's also a relief not to feel like I have a huge secret anymore. I will say, though, that I won't ever tell them the details of what I did to myself. They just don't need to know that. Not all parents will be so understanding, of course. And even with mine, there were some really tough times. But the fact that you say what upset them would be that you didn't come to them first suggests to me that they would be really supportive. Again, though, I'm saying all this, but still haven't told my parents I'm gay, so I'm really not want to talk here.
It's good that you could share that with your parents. It can be tough to open up about personal stuff. They might surprise you with their understanding. I've had some moments like that too, where I hesitated to tell someone something important, thinking they'd react badly. It's a relief to not hold on to secrets anymore. But I get not wanting to share every detail with them. It's all about finding your comfort zone.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.